Welcome to our lecture series for the Human-Centered Design Bootcamp. In this video, we will be focusing on the empathize phase. As a human-centered designer, you need to understand the people whom you are designing for. The problems you are trying to solve are rarely your own. They are those of particular users. And in order to design for your users, you must build empathy for who they are and what is important to them. So far, we dedicated some time focusing on understanding the problem and the context. Now it's time to create a deeper understanding of the people you are designing for. In order to gain those insights, it is important for you as a human-centered designer to empathize with the people you are designing for so that you can understand their needs, their thoughts, their emotions, and motivations. The good news is that you have a wide range of methods at your command for learning more about people. The even better news is this: with enough mindfulness and experience, anyone can become a master at empathizing with people. So, what is this empathize phase about? During the empathize phase, we try to learn from our communities and our users. We are trying to understand what people want or need. Through various design research methods, we engage people in conversations to generate insights and understand what they care about, what are their pain points, aspirations, and needs. During the empathize stage, we are still diverging, bringing in new learnings and perspectives to expand our knowledge about the challenge. The goal of this phase is to engage with the most relevant and most underrepresented stakeholders related to the problem you are working to solve. This phase is also focused on having dynamic conversations and gaining new perspectives through one-on-one conversations and observations. And there will be tools in the empathize phase that are designed to help you and your team to understand the experiences, emotions, and motivations of others through empathy. So, what is empathy? Empathy is really this capacity to understand or feel what another person is experiencing, but not from your point of view. It should be from within the other being's frame of reference. So, through empathy, we are able to put ourselves in other people's shoes and connect with how they might be feeling about their problem, circumstance, or situation. In other words, empathy means building a deep understanding of the problems and realities of the people you are designing for. Empathy requires us to put aside our learning, culture, knowledge, opinions, and worldview purposefully in order to understand other people's experiences. It requires a strong sense of imagination for us to be able to see through another person's eyes. It requires humility so we can seek to abandon our preconceived ideas and biases. And it requires that we build conscious awareness of other people's needs, wants, motivations, and goals. In the empathize phase, you'll explore different ways to understand people. This could be achieved through interviews, focus groups, asking people to group or rank elements, plot a sequence of events, map elements in relation to one another, draw a sketch, a collage, create or engage with props such as photographs or objects to elicit discussion, play games, etc. You'll observe and ask people about their hopes, experiences, needs, feelings, and desires, all of which will inspire ideas that improve lives. If we are to empathize with users, we should always try to adopt the mindset of a beginner. What this means is that as designers, we should always do our best to leave our own assumptions and experiences behind when making observations. Our life experiences create assumptions within us, which we use to explain and make sense of the world around us. However, this very process affects our ability to empathize in a real way with the people we observe. Since completely letting go of our assumptions is impossible, we should constantly and consciously remind ourselves to assume a beginner's mindset. It's helpful if you always remind yourself never to judge what you observe, but to question everything, even if you think you know the answer, and to really listen to what others are saying or feel what other people are feeling. And empathy is really the true foundation of human centered design. So, why we empathize? Well, to uncover insights, because watching what people do and how they interact with their environment gives you clues about what they think and feel. It also helps you to learn about what they need. And by watching people, you can capture physical manifestations of their experiences, what they do and say. This will allow you to interpret intangible meaning of those experiences in order to uncover insights. These insights would lead you to innovative solutions. Remember, the best solutions come out of the best insights into human behavior. But learning to recognize those insights is harder than you might think. Why? Because our minds automatically filter out a lot of information in ways we aren't even aware of. We need to learn to see things with a fresh set of eyes. It is critical to the human centered design process that we gain empathy for the stakeholders we are serving through our design decisions. This means conducting design research in the field in order to more deeply understand the context, the stakeholders that are currently involved, the current problem scenario, and how the challenges are being addressed today, but through the eyes of the beneficiary. We must empathize with those we are serving in order to meet their needs and identify and solve the problems that matter the most to those stakeholders. So, what steps can we take to ensure we understand the user's experience and needs? Let's look at some tools and methods we will be using during the empathize phase. This phase of the design challenge will include stakeholder mapping, preparing to interview, creating an interview guide, and using reflection tools. A number of tools will not be used during the bootcamp, and therefore I won't be covering those in this video. You also can refer to the Empathize guidebook, where you can find a number of tools, instructions on how to use them, a demo, facilitation tips, and reflection tools and rubrics to help you self-assess your progress. So who should we engage with to gather valuable user insights? Who should we empathize with? One exercise that can help us to understand who should we engage with is a stakeholder map. At the beginning of a design project, it is important to identify the key stakeholders and their relationships. Remember, stakeholders are those people, groups, or individuals who either have the power to affect or are affected by the problem you are engaged with. So the stakeholder map is a visual exercise of mapping all the possible stakeholders that relate or have interest in your project outcome. In this example on the screen, this is a stakeholder map for the traffic citation system, basically the system of traffic tickets and safety on the streets. I found a stakeholder map to be a very effective and simple way to think more systematically about relationships and influence, as well as identifying opportunities for change. So every time you get a speed ticket or a fine, for example, these are all the stakeholders that potentially are involved. You might have to deal with police or lawyers, or you might be asked to present yourself in front of the court. So there are a number of stakeholders that are involved in the traffic citation system, and this allows you to see who they are. You can also try to group them in a logical way and find out how they relate to each other. This is a very effective tool to allow you to identify what groups of people to engage with in order to explore what is their experience around the problem to help you find opportunities for design. This is another example of a stakeholder map. So this is a stakeholder map about the Swedish forests. I'm not a specialist in Swedish forests, but equipped with such a map, I can start to make sense of who are the different players that have influence in Swedish forestry and how do they relate with each other. And by having a map like this, if I want to learn more about Swedish forestry, I could already take some decisions about who I want to talk to. I might want to talk to large landowners and see how do they manage the forests. I would also be curious to learn about different incentives they have to keep the forest clean and safe. I could then take the information and then go talk to some of the forest agencies and authorities to explore their perspective around laws and regulations. These conversations with various stakeholders could help me to gain a wider perspective from different players, which would significantly increase my understanding of the problem. Another important concept during the empathize stage is the concept of extremes. Designing a solution that will work for everyone means talking to both extreme users and those squarely in the middle of your target audience. When recruiting people to interview, target both the big, broad mainstream and those on the either extreme of the spectrum. An idea that suits an extreme user will nearly certainly work for the majority of users. You should gather a mix of perspectives, especially from those who are not often heard. And without understanding what people on the far reaches of your solution need, you'll never arrive at solutions that can work for everyone. More importantly, talking to extreme users can spark your creativity by exposing you to use cases, hacks, and design opportunities that you would never have imagined. Think about all the different people who might use your solution. Extreme users can fall on a number of spectrums, and you'll want variety. Maybe you'll want to talk to someone who lives alone and someone who lives with a large extended family. Maybe you'll want to talk to both the elderly and children. If you want to promote healthy eating, you should talk to those who are extremely fit and healthy, but also the ones that have difficulty sticking to a healthy diet. Each will offer a take on your idea that can spur new thinking. Extreme users are few in number, but it doesn't mean you should disregard them and aim just for the main bulk of users instead. In fact, they can provide excellent insights that other users may simply not be prepared to disclose. By focusing on the extremes, you will find that the problems, needs, and methods of solving problems become magnified. The rationale is that if you can please an extreme user, you should certainly be able to keep your mainstream users happy. On the other hand, it is important to note that the purpose of engaging with extreme users is not to develop solutions for those users, but to understand problems that mainstream users might have trouble voicing. Remember, if you design for everyone, you design for no one. And we have this tendency to design for everyone. Our solution is for the world, but we can be much more successful if we focus on specific users and design with their needs in mind. Ultimately, we might end up serving a much larger target audience. So let's learn about research triangulation. And there are three ways for you to gain deeper empathy to understand the real needs of your users. You can observe what people do, you can listen to what people say they do, or you can immerse yourself in the experience of others. So, to empathize, you can observe, you can view users and their behavior in the context of their lives. You can immerse, you can wear your users' shoes, experience what they experience for a little while. And you can engage and interact with and interview users through both scheduled and short intercept encounters. So let's look individually at each of these modes of empathy. So let's start with observe. Observe how users interact with their environment. Capture quotes, behaviors, and other notes that reflect their experience. Watching users gives you clues as to what they think and feel and what they need. You can also learn a lot by just watching what people do and how they lead their lives, whether they are online or offline. So, the question we should be asking ourselves is why observations are so critical to identifying valuable insights. And the reality is that what people say, what people do, and what they say they do are entirely different things. One method we have at our disposal for learning through observations is called fly on the wall. Fly on the wall is an observational technique that allows a designer to collect data by seeing and listening. And it is useful to see what people actually do within real context and time frames rather than accept what they say they do. And usually designers employ this method to gain insight into people, environment, interactions, and objects in a space. It is the primary responsibility of the designer to stay completely unnoticed during the observation so as to not bias the participants in any way. Another very common observational method is called a day in life. A day in life is a type of ethnographic study where the designer follows and observes a user through a typical day. The objective of this activity is for the designer to understand the routine and typical activities of a user that the user performs by mere habit and that the user would perform subconsciously. The purpose of this method is to elicit the different interaction points of the user and the solution in the context of their lives. A day in the life also helps the designer gain insight into the needs, behaviors, and goals of the user. So, in a nutshell, don't just ask, learn to see, and look beyond the obvious. You should be practicing observing, and be curious and look for workarounds. In this picture, we can clearly see that the user felt the need of identifying the various cables and created a workaround for that. So this represents an opportunity for improvement, an opportunity for design. So let's move into immerse. In addition to speaking with and observing your users, you need to have personal experience in the challenge space yourself. Find or create, if necessary, experiences to immerse yourself to better understand the situation that your users are in and for which you are designing. Immersion involves wandering around in the user's world, gathering knowledge and staying open-minded and non-judgmental, and staying interested in observing a different perspective. So don't make assumptions, experience it firsthand. Designers can purposefully expand their horizon by regularly going off in the search of new experiences, immersing themselves in the life of others, and constantly seeking to make new personal connections. Take more photographs, ask more questions, and engage in quiet contemplation. Collaborate, have deeper, more meaningful, and honest conversations, reserve judgments, seek genuine understanding, and stay attentive to your feelings. This is a picture from a famous movie. It's actually a comedy, but the reason why I brought this image is to represent that even if you are foreign to the environment for which you are designing for, you should engage with that environment. If you are designing for students, you should actually spend some time in the classroom to understand what it feels like to be a student. One great technique for us to empathize through immersion is called try it yourself, where you use the product or service that you are trying to improve. This is very relevant because when you try the product or service that you are trying to design or improve, it allows your team to appreciate the experience that actual users might have. Try it yourself is a technique where the designer acts on behalf of the user. What usually happens in typical design projects is that the user is interviewed or surveyed and observed to ensure that the needs, behavior, and expectations that surface from these methods actually match. However, try it yourself allows the designer to pose as the user and experience the issue with firsthand. Another format that try it yourself methodology can take is where the designer doesn't survey, interview, or understand the user through prior interaction. In this format, the designer places himself in the user's shoes as well as context and experiences the same things, performs the same actions and roles as the user. And this allows the designer to develop a greater sense of empathy for the user and determine the needs and behavior that may not be explicitly stated by the user when asked. The designer would, therefore, figure out the challenges and problems that need to be addressed through design without interacting with the user. This can be the first step in the empathize phase and form the basis on which the surveys, interviews, role plays, and other methods can be derived. Because remember, there is no better way to understand the people you are designing for than by immersing yourselves in their lives. This picture is from a famous restaurant in which customers are blindfolded so they can experience what blind people would experience. It's a remarkable experience of senses that you get by putting yourself in a scenario of immersion into an experience of what it feels like to be blind. You can create these type of experiences for yourself and for your team to make sure that you deeply empathize with the people you are designing for. Because the better we can empathize with people, the easier we can create value for them and success for our interventions. This is another example of three dads that were trying to learn what it feels like to be 9 months pregnant. These three dads decided for one whole month to wear empathy bellies, which weigh a whooping 15 kilograms, to allow them to feel what it's like to be 9 months pregnant. And as you would imagine, they are not finding it all that easy. They only remove it for 5 minutes a day to take a shower. The expecting dads are keeping video diaries on their website, threepregnantdads.com, to document their thoughts, and unsurprisingly, they are already facing some struggles. As one of the dads, Steve, explains, everyday things like putting on your socks become a monumental task. This experiment of immersion became so successful that now these empathy bellies are being sold through Amazon. So let's move into engage, which is the primary empathy mode that we will be using. When you are seeking new understanding about other people and why they struggle with certain experiences, you might reach out to them and gain their perspective on the issues that matter to them. Learning about users in their own words will inform and inspire you. Engaging with people directly reveals a tremendous amount about the way they think and the values they hold. Sometimes these thoughts and values are not obvious to the people who hold them, and a deep engagement can surprise both the designer and the user by these unanticipated insights that are revealed. When listening to and observing users, try to embrace a beginner's mindset. Approach situations and problems as a novice, even if you already know a lot about them. When meeting with other people, ask open ended questions, even if you think you may already have or know the answers. You might be surprised. Let yourself learn to see the world from another person's point of view. One of the methods that we can use to engage with our users is called the card sort. A card sort is a quick and easy way to spark conversation about what matters most to the people you are designing for. In this picture, by running a card sort, a design team uncovered how this community in India thinks about solar lights. So card sorts are used when we need to develop a deep understanding of the user's mental models. It can be used to figure the way individuals break down a problem or a concept or a task in their head and sort them based on their priorities and their relative value. Another option for engaging is a group interview. And you can come to a quick understanding of a community's life, dynamics, and needs by conducting a group interview. Though a group interview may not offer the depth of an individual interview in someone's home, it can give you a compelling look at how a larger set of people you are designing for operates. The best group interviews seek to hear everyone's voice, get diverse opinions, and are strategic about group makeup. For example, an all-female group might give you insight into the role of women in a society, whereas a mixed group may not. If you are looking to get smart quickly on what is valuable to a community, group interviews are a great place to start. Another option you have is to conduct expert interviews. Experts can get you up to speed quickly on a topic, giving you key insights into relevant history, context, and innovations. Though the crux of inspiration is talking with the people you are designing for, you can also gain valuable perspective by talking to experts. Experts can often give you a systems level view of your project area, tell you about recent innovations, successes, and failures, and offer the perspectives of organizations like banks, governments, or NGOs. You might also look to experts for specific technical advice, but determine what kind of expert you need. If you are working in agriculture, perhaps an agronomist. You are working in reproductive health, maybe a doctor or policymaker may be a good bet. When recruiting your experts, give them a preview of the kinds of questions you will be asking and let them know how much of their time you'll need. And choose experts with varying points of view. You don't want the same opinions over and over. Ask smart, researched questions. Though you should come prepared with an idea of what you would like to learn, make sure your game plan is flexible enough to allow you to pursue unexpected lines of inquiry. Another method you can use is called sacrificial concepts. Sacrificial concepts are early, raw, and potentially flawed concepts that are made visual or physical and used as a medium for creating reaction, response, and discussion among users and design teams. So, what if I told you that some ideas are made to be killed? That's the thought behind sacrificial concepts. Ideas that are offered up in the user research process to give your interviewee something to respond or to react to. Sacrificial concepts are also referred to as conversation starters, and they can play a really important role in extracting insights from your users at a very early stage of the design process. In these pictures, a team in Uganda used these conversation starters to better understand local financial habits. And finally, we are going to learn more about one-on-one interviews. And this quote is very revealing about the importance of one-on-one interviews. It says, there's no better way to understand the hopes, desires, and aspirations of those you are designing for than by talking with them directly. One-on-one interviews can be a productive way to connect with real people and gain insights. Talking directly to the people you are designing for may be the best way to understand needs, hopes, desires, and goals. And interviews are generally structured, and interviewers will typically have a set of questions they wish to ask their interviewees. Interviews, therefore, offer the personal intimacy and directness of other observation methods, while allowing the design team to target specific areas of information to direct the human-centered design process. Most of the work happens before the interviews, where team members will brainstorm to generate questions to ask users and create themes or topics around the interview questions so they can flow smoothly from one to another. User interviews are usually conducted in the following format. You start by introducing yourself, and then you give a brief intro of your project, why you want to have the conversation, and what you want to discuss with your participant. You will then start with building rapport. And there are many little things you can do to build a better relationship with your interviewee. You can start with some easy questions to break the ice and let the participant feel at ease to open up with you. And then you start the conversation and you seek stories. And when interesting topics or information arise, you should follow up by asking why and getting deeper into those stories. Towards the end, you thank your participant for their time and invite them to add anything else they might want to share. Sometimes this last question brings the most valuable piece of information. Let's look at some interviewing tips. Ask a few easy starter questions. This allows you to break the ice with your participant and put them at ease. And ask open-ended questions. Asking the right kinds of open-ended questions and carefully listening to the responses, whether it's verbal or nonverbal, is the way to discover unmet needs. In the process, you will gain a deeper understanding of the decisions people make and the obstacles they face. Open-ended questions are questions that lead to a further discussion. They are questions that do not have a simple answer like yes or no or a number. And don't offer answers, even if they pause before answering. Don't help them by suggesting an answer. This can unintentionally get people to say things that agree with your expectations. And follow up on interesting things you hear. Talk about feelings. Ask why a lot. Even when you think you know the answer, ask people why they do or say things. The answers will sometimes surprise you. A conversation started from one question should go on as long as it needs to. And don't be afraid of silence. Interviewers often feel they need to ask another question when there is a pause. If you allow for silence, a person can reflect on what they've just said and may reveal something deeper. And never say usually when asking a question. Instead, ask about a specific instance or occurrence, such as, tell me about the last time you, and then add something. And encourage stories. Whether or not the stories people tell are true, they reveal how they think about the world. So ask questions that get people telling stories. And pay attention to nonverbal cues. Be aware of body language and emotions. And ask questions neutrally. What do you think about buying gifts for your spouse? That's a better question than, don't you think shopping is great? Because the first question didn't imply that there was a right answer. And don't ask binary questions. Binary questions can be answered in a word, and you want to host a conversation that is built upon stories. And finally, only ask one question at a time, one person at a time. Resist this urge to ambush your user. Also, do not talk about yourself and do not ask leading questions. Try instead, tell me about, oh, that's interesting. Can you say more about that? Can you show us how you do that? So let's talk about the interview guide. The interview guide is a document in which you formulate the questions you want to ask participants. The interview guide is not an interview script. Your interview guide is closely tied to topics that you want to explore or you are curious to learn more about. It is a good idea to test the interview guide. Try asking yourself or somebody else the questions and then determine whether or not it explores the areas that you are interested in. Your interview guide is also a good tool to help you think through the best way of asking questions before the interviews. During the interviews, the guide serves as a reminder of the themes and questions you want to make sure you cover. And although you write down the questions as you would ask them in the order you think makes the most sense, you don't necessarily end up following that order during the interview itself. In a semi structured interview, you have a carefully laid out plan and you are responsible for the overall structure of the conversation. But you also let the flow of the conversation decide how and when to ask questions. What about capturing an interview? Make sure you are prepared to capture. It can be easy to forget to capture useful thoughts and images for storytelling after an interview. So here are some tips to help you in the moment. Capture notes about interesting quotes or pain points or opportunities or something that was surprising or unexpected, ideas or insights. So you don't need to capture notes about everything. Just focus on the most important pieces of information. And always interview in pairs. If this is not possible, you should use a voice recorder because it's impossible to engage a user and take detailed notes at the same time. Also, remember to look for inconsistencies. Sometimes what people say and what they do are different. These inconsistencies often hide interesting insights. So let's learn more about how we should listen. There are a few tips that I would like to share with you. Try to act as you are meeting a new friend. Show interest in what people are saying. And remember, we do not correct, interrupt, give advice, or break in with the personal story. You are given 2 ears and one mouth. So listen for 80% of the time and speak for only 20%. And accept the point of view of your interviewee because people make sense and only they are experts on their lives. Remember, we are there humbly to learn and understand about someone's lives. As a final remember, when you go out in the field for interviewing, assign roles on your team. And try to rotate these roles with each new interview so you can all get a chance to try and learn how to be a good interviewer. You might have a person leading the interview, you might have another one focused on documenting, and you can have a third one focused on taking notes. In conclusion, as human-centered designers, we have a wealth of ways at our disposal to enable us to empathize with our users. Collectively, these methods offer us insight into the user needs and how they think, feel, and behave. Each method attempts to enhance the design team's understanding of their target user and to appreciate exactly what users needs and wants. The empathize phase enables us to gather important information that will be of value in the next stages of the process, where we will draw insights from that information to identify opportunities that can lead to new solutions. Thank you, and see you in the next lecture.